Everyone, thank you so much for joining this month's DevOps Community of Practice. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. That really helps us get the message out for folks that either have conflicts on their calendar or they want to share it with a colleague that might benefit from whatever content we're discussing. So again, this meeting's being recorded. Just a special note for this month, we're hosting a panel. You'll be hearing how agencies are spreading best practices, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions during this event as well. The event's going to be a little bit longer. We're going for an hour today as opposed to just a half hour. And in this event, we're going to be hearing from 6 participating agencies, and I'll lead a Q&A for about 20 minutes today. After that Q&A, though, we're going to open up to questions from you all, like we usually do, and we'll use the chat feature in Zoom to ask questions to the participants. Feel free to direct a question to a particular participant, or if it's open to any or all of them, let me know that too. I'll direct your question as needed. But we should have about 20 minutes for an audience-directed Q&A, so that should be exciting. Now, we may not be able to get to all of the questions, but no worries. That's what the listserv is for. If you haven't joined, go out to our URL. Alex will direct us there in chat. Go ahead and join that listserv and feel free to ask additional questions or get additional details there. Now, use the listserv because your questions and the answers that will be forthcoming may be of interest to others. So be sure to keep that interaction on the listserv as collaborative as possible. And as always, we're interested in your feedback. Alex will be sharing a URL later in the chat for our survey. This particular event is a bit of an experiment for us. It's our first attempt at running a virtual panel. And like with anything new, feedback is critical. So let us know what you think. We'd also be interested in hearing from you on potential panel topics in the future. So with that, feel free to email me direct at brian.fox@gsa.gov. I say again, brian.fox@gsa.gov if you've got any ideas for future panel topics. So otherwise, this should be a lot of fun today. Alex, over to you. Anything from a logistical standpoint to share?
Thanks so much, Brian. Yeah, we're so excited to have everybody here today. As Brian mentioned, please join our community if you're not already a member. That's where we'll keep the conversation going. Let us know if you want to present for the community. If you have anything interesting to share, we're always open to hearing what you want to suggest and the kind of content you want us to bring to you. Logistically, as a reminder, for those participants who are not the hosts, you will not be able to unmute yourselves. So please don't get discouraged if you try. It's just not a possibility. So direct all of your questions to the chat where Brian will facilitate them back to the panelists. Yes, that's all for me. Brian, back over to you.
All right. Just a reminder, this community of practice is really about sharing what's happening within DevOps across government. That can be technical and management lessons learned. And this includes successes as well as things you've learned from small failures. So feel free to put those questions in the chat. We'll get to those. As always, use the listserv to continue the conversation. Keep that going between these events. If you have a presentation that you'd like to share, let me know. Again, brian.fox@gsa.gov. And we're really excited about the panel today. It's going to be how agencies across government are spreading lessons learned. That's what this DevOps community of practice is about across government. But we learned there's a number of agencies that are doing this internally, really to do kind of a Kaizen activity, to borrow from Lean. And so we're going to be hearing from Graham at Census, Derek at USGS, Electra at GSA, Major Thomas from the U.S. Marine Corps, Lisa at OPM, and Alan at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. They're going to be talking a little bit about what they do, and then I'm going to get into a bit of a Q&A, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So today should take about an hour. And if you don't mind, Graham, in leading us off, can you tell us a bit about what's going on at Census as far as spreading best practices?
Sure thing. So right now we are kind of in the early stages of our DevOps journey, kind of in the first year. We've got an area within my division where we meet bi-weekly to discuss and work through issues. And then there's also an effort to stand up a census-wide community of practice event, specifically for DevOps. So those are the main things that we're doing right now to spread lessons learned.
Great, thank you so much. Derek, over to you.
Yep. So over at USGS, we've got 7 teams that are in various states of onboarding through the DevOps process. We are a cloud forward group. 3 of our groups have had kind of these successful onboarding events. And they are now kind of using a peer-to-peer method to spread the information that they need. As far as DevOps coordination, I'm responsible for the bureau-wide DevOps community that's organized through our community for data integration. And we have a monthly meeting, some pretty good demos, presentations, policy overviews, and a participant group of about 60.
Great. And Electra at GSA?
Thank you, Brian. At GSA, we started about 1.5 years ago with a DevSecOps working group. And this is comprised of about 80 participants, close to 100. And we determined that it was a lot of pockets of DevSecOps groups. And so we wanted to bring all the communication channels into one from all these various teams so that we can share each other experiences, the ideas. We even share code principles, discuss the lessons learned and training opportunities. It's open to employees, federal employees, contractors, and the speakers depend on the topics, and the meeting is typically held bi-monthly. So every other month we do a DevSecOps meeting. So we've had pretty good success, and we're looking forward to the next event, which Amazon is coming in to speak the end of February. So it's been a very tremendous growth opportunities for us for all the team members. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Electra. Major Jeremy Thomas, over to you. What's going on at the U.S. Marine Corps as far as spreading best practices?
In terms of spreading best practices, a lot of the work that I'm doing to help facilitate that is in a personal capacity, volunteering with the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. So that's a 501c nonprofit. And then in my day job for the past 3 years, I've consulted at the IT portfolio manager level. There's about 13 to 15 of them, depending on how you look at the Navy Marine Corps split of how that team works. And a lot of what I've been doing is teaching Scrum, design thinking, and other lean agile methods, both at the program level, but then down at the team level under the cognizance of the Assistant Secretary for Navy Research, Development, and Acquisition. So that's our senior acquisition executive for the Department of the Navy. And he has an agility cell that operates what we call the Center for Adaptive Warfighting. And we've certified over 500 military Scrum Masters, along with other design thinking skills. And those numbers are growing every day. And so we even do like train the trainer type things. And I've also led and participated in several engagements with Technology Transformation Services and GSA, where 18F and the Presidential Innovation Fellows, we've leveraged them to come in and help steer and accelerate some of our organic modernization efforts. So there's probably like 8 teams that have been doing DevSecOps and attempting to insert that or do a tech insertion of that into their programs. And then that's led to a series of workshops and program office engagements where we've seen both refactoring or even cloud native pilots that launch, and then that accompanying cohort gets to practice those techniques in production that we've been given them.
Wow, that's quite a bit. And it's good to hear some of those details. But Lisa, what's going on within OPM to facilitate spreading of lessons learned and maybe even reskilling?
Yes, hi. Lisa Nelson with the Engagement Manager for USA Jobs. And I'm here to talk about open opportunities, which many of you are probably familiar with, some of you aren't. Open Opportunities is the platform where any federal employee can post a task, an opportunity, a project, and any federal employee can apply to take on that task as long as they have their supervisor's approval and have the skills and interest and want to participate. We're building a skills-based enterprise-level government-wide collaboration and professional development and networking platform. where any federal employee can create a project, propose a working group, get testers for products, etc. Assemble teams even to work on projects. And by posting these opportunities, with people with the requisite skills can not only apply to complete the opportunity, allowing them to develop their skill set or develop a new skill set, but also they come out with concrete results that they talk about.
That's awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Alan, what's going on over at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office?
Well, a lot, actually. We've been involved in this for at least the last 5 years or so. And I think one of the things that's maybe a good way to kind of summarize the high-level view is that we're in the midst of the convergence of a bunch of different initiatives and efforts from kind of grassroots levels to efforts directed by senior executives across a bunch of disciplines that are now converging, I think, in a really helpful way. So those things include agile software development, DevOps practices, which we've been at since started about 2015 in earnest on that, lean IT, design thinking, and we're constantly bringing in new things into that mix. But in the last year, we've started a multi-year effort at a major transformation. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that these things that are now converging over the years have kind of prepared not only the IT organization, but all the other business units within USPTO to now really be at a, kind of a successful level of prior experience to jump into a major transformation that's touching not just the IT organization, but going across all the different units in the organization.
It's excellent to hear. Thank you all for sharing. We're going to go ahead and get into the Q&A. We've got some questions prepared, so we should have some thoughtful discussion around this. And the first question is, how did you get started creating your community within your particular agency? And Electra, what are your thoughts around that?
Yes, Brian, that's an excellent question. A lot of times we do not know how to begin. And it comes from a creation of ideas that was brought to myself with a creation of a member of a 3 team from the director of GSA IT PMO office. He selected 3 members. I was one of the 3 members selected. This was mid 2018. We entered in a brainstorming session for the purpose, to define the purpose of the working group, and kind of discussed how we were going to roll this out. We immediately contacted security, which provided us a distribution list so that we could have all the DevSecOps point of contacts for the community. Typically, security, every application needs to go through security, and they know where the DevSecOps applications and systems are. So they gave us a dump, and we took that distribution list and sent it out to various people with a DevSecOps checklist. And you can write this website down. It's called DevOpsChecklist.com, right? So there's several different questions. We wanted to take a baseline and a pulse check from the DevSecOps community. And again, we add sec in the middle because security tags along with us from the beginning to end, and you want to get them in early. So we received the surveys back. You had individuals completing the surveys, contractors, federal, teams, so we wouldn't have a lot of reduplication of teams. Teams filled the survey out. And then we had a kickoff presentation to GSA IT leadership with those results, okay? And then we had a second kickoff with the DevOps community with the folks who filled the survey out. We had results of every category. It was 6 different categories, 48 questions. It's a pull down checkbox if you go to that website, and it's fairly easy. It takes 10 minutes, at probably max 10 or 15 minutes. So when we brought the results back, we had about a 68% response rate. And so we were able to get a maturity level, set a baseline to understand the areas of focus where we needed to be. And so that established the regular cadence of these DevSecOps working group meetings. And that's it, Brian, on that question.
Yeah, thank you, Electra. And
Yes.
Lisa, what are some of the thoughts you have related to getting a community going?
Yeah, well, open opportunities, interestingly, was something that grew largely organically for many years. We got started, as some of you probably know, while I was at GSA. The program originated at GSA and moved to OPM. And we got started because we were given a huge project, no additional resources, such as, happens frequently in the federal government. And we were trying to figure out, how do we accomplish this big task with basically 3 or 4 people at any given time working in our group. And so we also had a lot of connections with people that were doing the kind of work we were doing in other agencies using listservs. And so we had kind of a community already, and we thought to ourselves, what if people would be interested in other agencies in working on projects that were outside of their day-to-day job? Would they not only be interested in doing this and helping their colleagues, but would they find value in it? And would their agencies find value in what they were able to bring back from participating? And we started out doing that. We had metrics. We followed up on the completion rate, what projects were posted, what people said, what the user experience was, and basically did a pilot. And people loved that. They felt the value that they got out of that was tremendous, and what they brought to their agency of just being able to get outside of their day-to-day work and find out what others were doing and bring that back were valuable. And we just kind of grew from there organically. The project moved because professional development became such a critical part of it, and of course OPM is where a lot of professional development work is centered. So we've been, since we've been there, we've been doing a lot of work trying to get the word out. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, because I know that's another question, is how do you market and get the word out? And so a lot of our work, a lot of our growth was organic, although now we're really focusing on how we expand that.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting from an OPM standpoint, which is to facilitate all of government. And,
and what else is interesting too, that doesn't happen very often in government, and I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from that, which is not something I'll delve into, but is moving a project from one agency to another. That doesn't happen very often.
That's right. And that would have some interesting lessons there as well. And to that, Alan, what techniques have you tried for building your community of practice internally, and what's worked well, and what would you avoid?
Well, that's interesting because it's really multifaceted at USPTO. And, a moment ago, Lisa mentioned the kind of organic effort that she had been involved in. Mm-hmm. And we saw that particularly with DevOps, although in contrast, the directive for Agile software development, the initial pursuit of that came from the undersecretary straight down from the top. So we've had, this kind of mix. I'll speak to the DevOps in a little more detail because that's one of the ones I was most directly involved with. On the DevOps front, the thing that became a real catalyst was USPTO hosting in our auditorium one of the monthly DevOps DC meetups back in November of 2014, and by sheer coincidence, that meetup had put out an announcement that said, "Hey, if you want to come before the program for tonight's meetup, if you want to come a couple hours early and talk about the possibility of organizing the first DevOps Days DC, please do. And so I did, and got to see that creation of the DevOps Days DC, which is has been held 5 consecutive years and will be held again this probably late spring or early summer. At any rate, that really started building the community because we got our people involved, and the USPTO actually hosted the DevOps Days DC conference for the first 3 years.
Very cool.
The last couple of years they've been in other venues, one downtown and one out by Tyson's. But that was one facet of starting to kind of really jumpstart that community and developed a lot of interest. There were several things that then kind of fell out of that, which was us in one flavor of that was kind of adopting that meetup or DevOps Days pattern, but hosting internal events, just limited to our own staff. And so we did those, and we had things like Ignite Talks and a number of formats of those kind of things. I think one of the biggest kind of themes that has emerged is that we've just kept experimenting. We have tried a lot of things, and the one thing that I'd advise people to avoid is to avoid trying just one thing, and to treat things as experiments, and to avoid letting people be discouraged if the experiments aren't that successful. Unsuccessful experiments in a true kind of agile DevOps sort of spirit should be treated as learning opportunities. So we've tried some things, and some of them haven't resonated, and so we don't repeat them. And then some things really, catch fire, and we just keep them going. But we've done newsletters, a variety of internal events. We keep changing the format of the internal events, some with invited speakers, some where all the speakers are our own people internally, different formats for that. We've had open spaces for those who are familiar with DevOps Days or other organizations, that kind of emergent agenda meeting that's where the topics to be discussed are determined by the people actually present at the time the meeting convenes. And then that kind of caught on, and we thought, well, what other emergent agenda meeting formats are there? So we've done things like Lean Coffee, and also another format called World Cafe, which is a little more structured than an open space, but still definitely an emergent agenda. So I think one of the remarkable things about our experience is just trying a lot of things, and at a lot of scales. Some of them with 500 plus people in the room, and some of them with 5 people in the room.
And Alan, it's interesting you use the word experiment, and I just love that word. And we happen to have someone from a science agency here. So Derek, what's your thoughts as far as exploring and experimenting to grow your community of practice there at USGS?
Yeah, I like those comments that Alan had. I think that reflects a lot of what we've tried. We have sort of kind of that open room, that dojo kind of way of operating, where you just have an open space where people are able to come in, ask questions. We have the mid-level, where you have sort of internal organized events that are somewhat informal. I think we've tried that at our Patuxent Wildlife Research Center at headquarters, and now here in GTalk out in Denver. The informal is good, but you get a kind of smaller audience and not always an engaged participation, because people are kind of just coming in and out. They know that maybe it's a lunchtime event. They come for half of it and they run off to a meeting. I think one of the more effective techniques, as you know, has been to use our community for data integration, which has a more formalized structure, has a way for organizing larger groups, so that lifts a lot of that effort off of those individuals that are, want to organize but don't have a full-time job for organizing, integrating groups. You think of all the ways that we handle our agency calls, our calendaring, to have another group that's responsible for that, and then you come in as a participant, I think seems to be really good. A lot like what we're doing right now, right? Where you have, I participate, you have a structure, you have somebody that's great at doing the calendar events, making sure that there's a standing meeting and helping out with the invites. That added benefit really allows myself and my co-host for our bureau-wide DevOps to focus on attracting the individuals that are going to present. So I think a lot of my time is spent on finding interesting topics and then using our coordinator, Leslie, over at CDI, which is the Community for Data Integration, to then put everything together, handle the listserv. The listserv blasts out to a much larger group than just the DevOps community. So you get a more mixed group. I think when we were doing it internally over at headquarters and out at the research centers, we were getting a smaller cadre of individuals that were just DevOps focused. What we see with the broader communities that has a DevOps emphasis is that we're bringing in scientists, research grade biologists, IT technicians, DevOps specialists, programmers, geographers, cartographers. So I think that having that elevated, broader communication channel has been really helpful. But I wouldn't say, dispense with the informal small groups, because I think that's where your teams are actually getting things done. Right? The broader community is where you're ingesting, getting information, sharing that, and then where you're teaming down at the kind of in the trenches is where you're really sharing the ideas within a small group that's responsible for implementation. And that's kind of been my experience. And I totally agree with Alan. Throw it against the wall, see what sticks. Some stick, don't be disappointed if it doesn't, and experiment.
Jeremy, what about some of the events over at U.S. Marine Corps? How are you growing those within that defense space?
I would say that we co-op a lot of the federal and local events that happen. Again, like I work through the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. And so very similar to the pattern of, we call it Drink and Think, where it's an informal gathering, anyone can come in. And it's really just to get people to connect and to share problems, and then to kind of like bound and frame those problems. Because what we found, and this gets into something to avoid, you can't force innovation or adoption of DevOps. You can't like top down force people to do it. It gets into, you want it to be something that they want to join, that they see the benefits and they're volunteering to join. And those are the people you want to organize around. And so then what we'll level up into is what we call link and learn. So we'll give them small skills. We'll show them like SQL, we'll show them data analysis. We'll show them things like even you get into some of the Amazon and Microsoft organic kind of machine learning tools and things. And we'll just show them like, this is how it works. This is how you would manage it, do some engineering management with a project on this. This is how DevOps can enable this. And then we will go into like these higher platform engagements where we'll actually have people like Secretary Gertz, which is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, Acquisition, bring people in for a weekend, and he'll kind of do an inspirational talk in the beginning. And then we'll do a design thinking workshop through the weekend to kind of be like, okay, how are we going to get from where we are now to where we need to be? And the biggest thing that I think we've focused on is our culture. And you can't really change culture up front. You have to, what we've learned is you have to like adopt a bunch of practices and get disciplined about practicing them. And then you'll see the culture change is something that is resultant or like an outcome of changing your practices and your approaches. And so where we've seen that, we've really tried to highlight the bright spots, and we will, we get on LinkedIn, social media, everywhere, and we try to share that. And we found that sharing it in those informal channels is how someone who's disparate in the Marine Corps away from me, from where I work, will then email me or direct message me and say like, hey, how do I get involved? And we found that that's really effective at spreading it. And then, like I mentioned, we have that Center of Adaptive Warfighting. We will send a mobile training team anywhere in, CONUS or overseas to go then train that unit and then, you know, help them get some of these practices. Because even if they're not doing the software development and things like that, they can adopt a lot of the Scrum and the Lean Agile methods, and, you know, it makes them interface with giving us better constructive feedback and things like that, better personas. They can kind of speak our language, and then they can help our efforts become more effective. So it's, you know, you lean from informal into like these larger, more formal kind of structured things. And we find that the larger things give your effort legitimacy. And then anytime you run into kind of what we call oppositional resistance, you really focus and approach that with empathy and try to understand, like, why does this person see this as a, you know, thing that can unravel what they're trying to bring them. And then you try to show them, you try to get them to one of those Lincoln Learn events to say, like, maybe you don't understand these practices and these technologies because I don't think it means what you think it means. And typically there is like an epiphany that person has at that event. Oh, okay. And then, you know, so it's find people and evangelize and then convert them is how I would summarize all that.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for sharing that. And, you know, it's been it would probably be categorized as a belief, but also experience that, you know, it's those conversations like this. But I think, Derek, as you described, and Ellen, as you described, at the team level, where there's increased psychological safety because it's tighter, they can share more on the technique, but those larger events are critical, maybe as critical. And I think about in any sort of organizational transformation or change, there's two things that need to happen, and they're coming from two different ends, right? One is the leader has a vision, or leaders have a vision. Sometimes it's only outcome based. Sometimes it's about applying a method they're excited about, whether it was lean and TPM, right? Toyota Production Management, or Agile, or now DevOps, right? So the leaders may be thinking, the leadership may be thinking of one thing. Meanwhile, the workforce needs to implement, and the workforce knows a lot of where the devils in the details are, right? On implementation. So these conversations, loose or structured, you know, all of it, all of the above, allow for some of that. So to that, and Jeremy, we're actually starting to tee this up a bit, but I'm going to go back to Derek. What are some positive outcomes you've seen from spreading lessons learned?
I think one of the biggest ones is the increased velocity of adoption. So as a team that was unsure about adopting a DevOps practice, it's a lot like migrating to the cloud. Once you see another group or individual that's done something and is in a similar circumstance, so whether that's within federal government, within our own bureau, or within your own program, sharing that information takes that edge off, or the anxiety that you feel about being a first mover. So that I think that's the biggest one, is that once you see someone else that's done it, said that, yes, there were some issues, here are the hurdles that you'll probably face because you're either a team same size as mine, or you're in a program or federal bureaucracy the same size as mine, that you're now willing to move forward, whereas you might have been hesitant before that. So that's the biggest one that I see, is that you really increase the rate of adoption and the stumbles that occur early on.
Jeremy, back over to you. Any observed outcomes?
It's kind of anecdotal, but some of these things, we're always waiting for the snowball to turn into a positive avalanche. And the favorite impact that I observed was one of those things that just kind of spontaneously happened, I think, because we were setting the right conditions. And that was a micro coding academy emerged in one of our regional admin support centers. And so they have these entry level admin clerks that they were screening them for their language aptitude to do foreign language training. And the ones that didn't get selected for it, the IT support guy was like, well, I'll take them. I would like to do some experimentation with them. And they actually started using a guild construct to start teaching them coding. And they built them into what they were calling user developers. So they were using .NET framework and SharePoint as a platform, and actually building use cases and actually delivering to the admin community like work product and feature sets And they developed those solutions locally, and in many cases, the solutions ended up scaling to the enterprise. So they shipped it back to headquarters, Marine Corps. You know, hey, look at our source code, look at what we built, and that went back down to a program office in Quantico, and they integrated it into their program of record. And those are DoD accredited systems. So the admin community is like immensely proud of this achievement. And at the beginning of it, they were very skeptical because they're giving up talented people to not be doing admin things, to be doing this coding stuff. And now they see it kind of as like their crown jewel. And they even use the term like, hey, it's a force multiplier. We give 2 or 3 of our brightest into this that have the aptitude, and we end up getting, 10 times amplification of productivity out of our workforce. That's amazing. And, and then the accolades and things that get to come with it. And so, I think that's a
powerful, I'm going to cut you off there, Jeremy. That's a powerful phrase in the DoD circles, force multiplier. Because initially folks are going to question, why are you taking my folks to do what? Right? Because they're very value oriented. And so, yeah, that's fantastic. That term got kind of kicked back to you after a while. Yeah, Graham, if you don't mind, any positive or observed outcomes over at Census?
Yeah, sure. So we are trying to work the DevOps sharing at the both local level and at the high level. So we've got a small group going on, and one of the positive outcomes is that we've started to spread and increase these practices through cross-pollination. So basically, we've got a team, and they're kind of leading the way on setting up their DevOps activity. And then we've got other teams that are being evangelized. They're coming to the meetings. They're getting interested in it, but they don't really know, okay, well, I'm interested, but what do I do? And so we kind of get some cross-pollination going where we've got some people that are on multiple teams, and they're able to, even if they don't necessarily know specifically all the technical answers, they can connect other people to say, okay, this is what they do over here. Let me connect you to this person, and then you can sit together and learn, build this pipeline or this particular aspect of it. So that cross-pollination is helping to spread the practices, and that's really nice. Because when you understand learning theory, one of the major ways to learn is directness. You've got to do it, and so people are certainly willing to come to events and hear things and get evangelized and get excited, like Jeremy was talking about. That inner motive. But then where do you take it? How do you keep that momentum going so that all that learning is not lost? Well, they want to get their hands on it. So then they need someone to kind of come along and hold their hands. And so by cross-pollinating, that seems to really help us spread practices, at least within our area.
I'm going to open it up to you all. Feel free to answer this next question. How are you addressing, because Graham, you brought it up, when the result is a big question mark of you get the group together and folks are sharing lessons learned or their successes, and they come to that point of, but how do we do this, whatever that next step is? And everybody's like, I don't know, that sounds cool. Don't know how to do it. It might be a training opportunity. How are you facilitating addressing those questions or opportunities? Sorry, I'm putting you all on the spot.
We have one of the interesting things that we've done is really over the last 3 months is pulled together a group of community managers. Open opportunities is really big. We have, it's obviously not government size. We have about close to, 20,000 people that are part of our community overall. And it's really hard, as you were talking about, there's the big group and then getting the smaller groups together. So how do you act on ideas and bring ideas to the forefront that are percolating out there? And so we've developed this community managers forum, which are people that are really trying to help forward open opportunities, get the word out, get people to participate, and people with shared interests. And they come together and we work on these cross-cutting issues. They bring together a group of people to talk about these issues that percolate, that we want to get some decisions made or some activity going to help solve the problem. And they kind of self-form their own groups. And sometimes we pull other people in from the outside, but it's a little different maybe than what you're talking about, but it's one way of addressing it.
Yeah, for anyone else, does the forum facilitate development of training plans or IDPs in that way, that folks start to understand what they don't know? It's one, and that's a scary space. That's kind of Brene Brown stuff. Having a forum that allows folks to safely say, wow, that's cool, but that would be great, but I don't know.
Well, one thing that kind of touches on some of what you were talking about, Brian, is that, I mentioned earlier that notion of an emergent agenda. Mm-hmm. And the classical meetings with agendas have their place for sure, but there's a kind of a hidden assumption there that the creator or creators of the agenda are the ones who know what everyone needs, and that everyone who shows up will now just be kind of passive consumers, or certainly at least they're following the preset agenda. And one of the reasons that the DevOps Days conferences have been so successful is that the first half has that kind of structure. The first half of each of the 2 days in a DevOps Day conference, the first half is structured, and they're like 3 or 4 keynote addresses. And then the second half are these open spaces where the people who are attending are all polled, what topics do you think are important? Mm-hmm. And then those are quickly ranked with the dot voting, and the top topics get split out into breakout rooms, and then people go talk about what they kind of collectively just decided were the most important things. And when we did some of those kinds of open space conversations, internally into our organization, you get these things emerging that you might not have expected. And similarly, kind of I don't know if folks are familiar with the lean coffee, but that's kind of like the small scale version of this emergent agenda. You can get, somewhere between maybe 5 or 10 people around a table and without an agenda. And the first thing that you do is ask everyone to write down on sticky notes, what are the most important topics on maybe a theme that people have been called together to deal with. But, they basically just quickly jot down, for this problem or this issue, I think I think the things we need to discuss are these. And those sticky notes are thrown out and kind of voted on quickly. People get 3 votes to put on a single issue or spread across multiple issues. And then at that point, it's just handled like a Kanban, and they're taken and they're discussed for 5 minutes, and then the next one's discussed. But the thing that we've seen when we've done that is that people who might be hesitant to surface an issue, or people who wouldn't have a chance to surface an issue at all if the agenda were predetermined, are suddenly more engaged and raising issues that might not have been anticipated. And that can really be helpful to get engagement, deeper buy-in, broader understanding.
Yeah, Alan, thank you. That's wonderful to get your perspective on that. Next question is going to be directed at Lisa around reskilling, especially coming from OPM. I had an opportunity to interact with the Center of Excellence and the portion of it that was focused on reskilling. So this is of personal and professional interest to me as well. How is your event and activity in general facilitating reskilling? Does your event allow for discussions related to redefining existing jobs and work? And does your event allow for discussions to make staff less fearful of job loss, et cetera? Feel free to run with that one.
Yeah, there's some really interesting things. Because we're an agile platform, people can post opportunities and apply for opportunities that are outside their work environment, their skill set. A really great example I love to talk about is that there was a gentleman who was a PIF, Presidential Innovation Fellow, and he was working a lot on open data, and he was working with HHS and AI. And there's really been problems around cancer patients finding the right trials to be in for their types of cancer. And he was working to create a way that cancer patients could find better trials, more successful trials for themselves. So using open data, working within AI, he posted several open opportunities on the platform, looking for people who had developmental skills, who had organizational skills, who were skilled in risk management, things that you don't think of as necessarily getting him to the to his outcome that he was looking for. But those people that were selected from his opportunities, and he had a wide number of people interested, brought their skills, but learned at the same time about AI and about data and about how you do these other things. At the same time, they're using their own skills. And there's so much opportunity for this to happen on the platform. And I really wanted to talk about this in this forum to sort of feed people's ideas to take back to their own agencies. We have some work going with the cyber reskilling folks who you may or may not be familiar with, but a year ago they put out OMB and put out a call for people that were interested in making a career change into cyber, and people didn't have to have any skills at all. They were able to, apply, and they had like 2,000 people, 50 were selected. They went through a training course of 3 months, and unfortunately what's happened, there were 47 people that came out of these trainings, and they were supposed to be able to go into the new field, but as you know, in government, you have to have a year's worth of experience. So what happened to a lot of those people, they did not find a place to go that would develop them the rest of the way. So we have something that's going to be coming out in the next month or so, where agencies have come together and put together 9-month details that will get people to that year's worth of experiential learning. They're going to be posted on open opportunities. We've developed a community page that will be live when these opportunities are completed. About 10 of them are in the works now. They will keep going with them. And that page will show those specific community cyber opportunities. So I say all this because I really just want to get everybody's juices flowing. I think that because Open Opportunities is an agile platform, because we can adapt to user needs as we go, there's a lot of opportunities to continue this. We've had people change careers entirely from taking opportunities that are different from what they were currently or what they were in before. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time with it, but I just wanted to get the juices flowing.
No, Lisa, that's wonderful to hear about. Because for the audience, you may have read up on, even with AT&T has made some tough decisions around investment in people, and they understand that competing with Facebook and Amazon and others, are they going to even attract the talent that they need to survive and compete? And I think that similar kind of understanding is starting to be understood in government, and that's a wonderful program. And it's interesting that it was also learning as well, iterating and learning. That the plan's not going to be perfect, so it's important to learn from the outcomes of it, and you all were flexibly doing that. That's terrific to hear about. Any questions from the audience? There was one that came in. And so, Alyssa, thanks for asking that. Graham, that's coming over to you. Alyssa's asking if you use the Kanban board there, or is that just a prop to have on the background for the talk? Over to you, Graham.
This particular board is a prop, but we do use a physical board. We use GitLab for our user story management, but meeting space is very it's at a premium here at the building, and so the only place we can really meet daily is in a closet. So we meet there. We don't really have projector system, not a very easy way to display our virtual board, and so we do supplement our virtual board with a physical board with the painter's tape and the sticky notes and all the good stuff that you see there.
So Census is operating like a startup then. That's great. No, yeah, it's all good. Yeah, yep. Well, everybody's got limitations, right? It's about making the most of them. Yeah, let's see. Unless there's other questions coming in. Electra, I'm going to go back to you. What's the size, breadth, composition of your DevOps community at GSA?
Okay. We went to security and received a massive distribution list, so we had to go through that because security knows where all the DevSecOps groups are. And we ended up with a list of 86 invitees. In fact, yourself has been on it, and Alan was one of our initial speakers, Alan. So thank you for that. But it's optional attendance. We normally get at least about half of that. It's a combination of federal employees and contractors. We have done mostly internal briefings. We will start to focus on external briefings. I'm partnering with the VMO office, the vendor management office, and doing some table talks in the future. So we are now bringing in vendors, as long as they're not selling to us. They can come in and give us some best practices. And so we hope to bring in more vendors in this year. It's a 1-hour meeting. Typically, I'm typically the moderator. Normally, you have a couple guest speakers, no more than 1 to 2. Again, I mentioned we have federal agencies come in. Alan came in from his agency. And it's normally 15, 20 minutes, 15 minutes questions, and then we distribute the information. It's typically a technical team, but it's open to anyone. You have people that just want to come and learn. So it's open to anyone, but it's kind of technically driven, and the topics are technically driven. So that's pretty much the makeup of it. We're looking forward to some great things this year. And as I mentioned, our first vendor coming in is Amazon at the end of February. And they are bringing in best practices, not trying to sell us anything. We're already buying. So I will be getting a presentation from them in a couple of weeks. So that ought to be some useful best practices information from them. So any vendor want to come in and give us best practices, we're going to line them up at the door.
And I've got one more question, Derek. It's going to be coming towards you. Electra, thank you. And
thank you.
I'd like to offer up to the 6 panelists that if you have any content that's available online, email me URLs to that, and I'll kick that out on the listserv. So if you have videos or anything else that's recorded, or presentation material, whatever. Electra, you're just describing their Amazon coming in and happening to talk with GSA. That's likely of value beyond just GSA. Other folks who have contracts with them. So.
Absolutely, we can share that information.
All right. Otherwise, Derek, last question I'm going to pitch for the day is coming over to you, sir. Towards the future, is there something you'd like to try with your event, but you haven't yet?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that we want to try is, right now we're predominantly remote, right? So most of our participants are calling in from across the country. And so this is the kind of that formal group that we run through Community for Data Integration. That's our bureau-wide. I think you're familiar with that. I want to take what we do with the smaller team structure, which is have the kind of storming events where we brainstorm, come up with topics, challenge each other to look for solutions. And then what if we expanded that to either maybe a regional, or could we do multiple sessions in different time zones where you really get people, bodies in a room, and then conduct what we generally do in a smaller forum. I think we learned this at DevOps Days, where get these groups together. They're almost like birds of a feather groups where they choose their own topics, then they present or divulge information that they have about that particular topic, where you have some individuals with some expertise, and then come up with solutions that they then share to the broader group. So a large group, maybe 40 or 50, break them up into 4 or 5 groups. They come up with solutions and topics, and then they share that to the plenary. So I think that that's something that I'd like to try. I got to figure out how we would coordinate that and what the level of interest, because there is that time component, and physically getting somewhere isn't always easy for everyone. But I think there's a lot to be gained from those larger face-to-face.
Derek, absolutely. And speaking of giving it a shot, right? Courageously trying something different and new. I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. It's wonderful having everybody participate from so many different agencies and geographies as well. Having everybody come in, technology allows for it.
Hey Brian, there is a question. Do you want to address that question?
Sure.
Read that one out.
There's one that came in. I'm just going to open it up to you all. So just hop on it. It's coming in from George. Have there been any discussions as to the best continuous integration, continuous delivery deployment tool chain to use? Since agencies have their own procurement of various software tools, wondering if there's an opportunity for influencing those procurements. Imagine if everyone used GitLab, et cetera. So there's probably 2 parts to that. Have y'all adopted a thing? And then how did you facilitate the conversation around deciding before adoption? So I'll open it up. Feel free to hop on it.
Yeah, this is Derek. So we've gone with GitLab for our tool chain. We're getting a couple teams on board with GitLab that had previously used a combination of GitHub, Travis CI, kind of a number of bolt-ons. And what we're discovering is that it's advantageous to be in a single tool chain for your entire CI/CD pipeline. And we're able to gain traction by, I guess, talking directly to our software policy group. So that's run out of our hazards team. I think manages our software policy and our software repo and our software release. And getting them on board really was the key to that, as we shifted off of GitHub to GitLab, and then we used the free version, and then we were eventually able to get them to buy a premium for groups of 10.
Cool. Any other thoughts?
Well, this is Electra. I can provide a list, but have we standardized and came to one solution? No. But we're doing some alternative analysis on the toolings right now. I've seen Jenkins being used, Bamboo. We're using UDeploy. We're also using Jira. I believe Jira has some. Well, no, not Jira. So how about CA release? So, and I think Zebia Labs. So those are what we're using for continuous deployments and integrations. We're not standardized in that method. And when you talk to pushing patches, we're using BigFix for deployments. So that's kind of what we're doing across different various teams.
Well, we've got only 1 minute left, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there. George, I'm actually going to tee that question up in the listserv again. So I'd offer up to our panelists, if you've got additional thoughts, add them in there. There's a survey, so folks can please give us feedback. What did you think of this? Otherwise, again, to the panelists, thank you so much for participating today. And next month, we're going to have Chris Lauer from NOAA, their Space Weather Prediction Center, come in and discuss and describe their first steps on DevOps. I think this is going to be fantastic. Oftentimes it can be the experts or the extremely experienced, like Jez Humble discussing or describing DevOps. I think it's a whole other thing to talk about how an entity, office, or agency took those initial steps, those brave initial steps. So I'm actually terrifically excited about next month's presentation from NOAA. So again, to the participants and to the audience, thank you so much for being here today. Give us some feedback, and thank you all. Sure appreciate it.